This Introduction to Python series is part of the EPSCoR Track 2 DDMD workshop. This presentation is a discussion of Python modules. The Python interpreter has a number of built-in functions. They're loaded automatically as the interpreter starts, and they're always available. We've already discussed several of them. For example, print and input for I/O, and number conversions, int and float. A function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. You can pass data, known as parameters, into a function. Generally, a function processes the data that's passed in and returns data as a result of this process. Let's look at the example int function. We call the function int, passing the string argument 21 to its parameter. The int function converts the string to an integer and returns the integer value, or 21. We then assign the integer to the variable age. Some additional built-in functions available in Python are absolute value and round. For example, round receives a floating point number in an integer representing the number of digits and returns the floating point number rounded to that specified number of digits. For example, we could call the function round passing arguments 34.7653 and 2 representing the number of digits that we want that value rounded to. We pass those values into the round function. The round function rounds 34.76543 to 2 decimal places and returns that floating point. That floating point we then assign to the variable $. When we print out the value of $, we see that the value is 34.77. In addition to built-in function, a large number of predefined functions are also available as part of libraries bundled with Python distributions. These functions are defined in modules. A module is a file containing definitions of functions, classes, variables, constants, or any other Python object. So basically, modules are files containing Python functions. A module can be imported into your Python program by using the import command in the form import module name. To access a module's function, type the module name dot function name parenthesis. The math module is a standard module in Python and is always available. To use mathematical functions included in this module, use the import math statement. Math is the module. Square root is the function, and 4 is the argument passed to the function's parameter. Let's consider the power function. This function, POW, has 2 parameters, x and y. When this function is called, it returns x raised to the power of y. For example, if we call the power function with the arguments 34.7 raised to the power of 8, you can see the output. The following 4 slides provides a list of the functions that are available in the math module. Notice that the list contains a column showing how to call the function and specifies in the next column what the function returns. For example, factorial is called with one parameter, and it returns the factorial of that parameter. Let's consider the math function factorial. So factorial accepts a value for x, and it calculates the factorial of x. So if we call the function with the argument 5 is passed into the parameter x. The function calculates the factorial 5, which is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, and returns 120. So what happens if we attempt to calculate the factorial of 5.2, noting that 5.2 is a floating point value? When we pass in a floating point argument into the parameter x, an error is generated, and this is the output that you would get to describe this specific error. So you can see at line 3, which is value is assigned math.factorial 5.2, that's where the error is generated. The type of error that is generated is a value error. And the information that describes the error says that factorial only accepts integers. Recall the Pythagorean theorem that if A and B are the lengths of the legs of a right triangle, and C is the length of the hypotenuse, then the sum of the squares of the length of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So this is represented by A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Let's write a Python program that calculates the hypotenuse of a right triangle. So with our program, we're going to get input from the user, we're going to process that input, and we're going to output the length of the hypotenuse. So first we're going to ask the user for the length of the two sides of a right triangle. Then we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the length of the hypotenuse, and then we're going to output the length of the hypotenuse. So first, to get the length of side A of a right triangle, we use the input function to ask the user to input the length of side A. The user enters a value, and we convert that value to an integer. Secondly, we ask the user to enter side B. We use the input statement, prompting the user to input the length of side B. The user types in an integer at the keyboard. We convert that to an integer, and we assign it to the memory location side B. Now we can calculate the length of the hypotenuse, or side C, by using first the math power function. So we find the power of side A, so basically A squared. Then we find the power of side B, B squared. We sum those, and then we find the square root of that sum and assign it to the memory location side C. Lastly, we output that information to the user by informing the user that the length of side C is side C. Another interesting Python module is the random module. You use the random module if you want the computer to pick a random number in a given range. So if you wanted a random integer, you would use the ranInt function. ranInt accepts two parameters, a lowest and a highest number. So for example, if you want to generate an integer between 1 and 5, the lowest value is 1 and the highest value is 5. And the first value should always be less than the second value. Let's consider an example of the randint function. First, we're going to ask the user to guess a number between 1 and 5. Then we're going to generate a random number between 1 and 5. Next, we're going to see if the user's guess and the random number are equal. And we're going to inform the user if their guess was correct, and we're going to let the user know what random number was generated. So we import the random module. Then we use the input function to ask the user to guess a number between 1 and 5. The user enters a value, convert it to an integer, and assign it to the user guessed. Next, we're going to generate a random integer between 1 and 5, and we're going to assign that random value to the memory location or variable random value. Now we're going to check to see if our random value is equal to the user guess. So we use the relational operator double equals, and we enter the expression random value equals user guess. That's either true or false. So true or false is assigned to the memory location or variable is correct. Now we're going to output the information to the user. So first we're going to tell the user whether or not their guess was correct. So we print guess correct, and we output the value stored in the variable is correct, and that's going to either be true or false. Next, we inform the user what random value had been generated. So we say the random value is, and we display the value stored in the variable random value. So in our example, when we run the function, we ask the user, guess a number between 1 and 5. The user enters the value 5. Then we output guess correct, false. The random value is 4.